Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, August 21st, 2024. We are in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 13. Let's start in verse 1. In the 23rd year of Joash, son of Ahaziah, king of Judah, Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, became king of Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 17 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord by following the sons of Jeroboam son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit, and he did not turn away from them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel, and for a long time he kept them under the power of Hazael king of Aram and Ben-Hadad his son. So Jehoahaz does the same sins that all the other kings of Judah have done in continuing to worship the golden bulls and say they're Yahweh. And God gets angry at Israel, and particularly Jehoahaz, and he becomes a vassal king to the king of Aram. And Hazael is the first king, and then Hazael's son Ben-Hadad is the king after him. And Jehoahaz has to suffer as being a vassal king. This is a sad state of affairs for Israel. And Aram becomes the dominant power and has an empire, and they control Israel. Verse 4, when Jehoahaz sought the Lord's favor, and the Lord listened to him, for he saw how severely the king of Aram was oppressing Israel, the Lord provided a deliverer for Israel, and they escaped from the power of Aram. So the Israelites lived in their own homes as they had before. But they did not turn away from the sins of the house of Jeroboam, which he had caused Israel to commit. They continued in them. Also the Asherah pole remained standing in Samaria. So Jehoahaz, when he got tired of this situation, he humbles himself before God, and he prays to God, and he asks God for help. And God sends the deliverer, and he becomes a free king again, able to rule his country. In the next few verses, we'll find out how poor a kingship he had, but he becomes independent. Somebody helps him out. It's not even his own power. It's somebody else's power that freed him from the king of Aram. And part of the reason God did this is he wanted Israel to continue to survive. He had promised that Jehu's descendants would sit on the throne for 4 generations. This is only the first one, and God's going to fulfill his promise. But Elisha is continuing his ministry and continuing to urge people to worship Yahweh. And Jehoahaz humbles himself and asks Yahweh for help, and he gets it. He's in bad shape, though. Let's look at verse 7. Nothing had been left of the army of Jehoahaz except 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers, for the king of Aram had destroyed the rest and made them like the dust at the threshing time. So Jehoahaz has an army of around 10,000 soldiers, 50 horsemen, 10 chariots. You can say a minimum of 2 people in a chariot, one the driver and the other the warrior. Very often they had up to 10 people in a chariot. So, even at that, though, 10 chariots is nothing. A lot of the armies at this point in time are, a small army might be 250,000 people. A typical army is probably about 500,000 people. A large army is 1 million people. The countries around them are becoming prosperous enough and able to support themselves enough that they're fielding armies that just swamp this 10,000 man army. So even at that, he's independent, but he doesn't even have an army that's enough to defend the land. If somebody tries to invade, his best strategy is run to the walled city and get everybody in it, and maybe his 10,000 men can defend a walled city. Maybe. The reason he's not overthrown is nobody invades. God protects the country. But while he's humbled himself before God, the people still worship incorrectly, and they have even put an Asherah pole up in Samaria. Jehu had destroyed it. His dad had destroyed it because it represented what Jezebel had imported. And the people have put it back up. And he didn't take it down. Jehoahaz didn't take it down. Verse 8. As for the other events of the reign of Jehoahaz, all he did and his achievements, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Jehoahaz rested with his fathers and was buried in Samaria, and Jehoash, his son, succeeded him as king. Now, a point there, Jehoash is the son of Jehoahaz, but that's not his real birth name. That's the name he gets when he comes to the throne. His birth name is Joash, the same name as the king of Judah. And he probably got named that before Joash became king of Judah. And nobody thought anything of it. 2 sons, a son in the royal house, the grandson of the king, being named the same thing as the 7-year-old down south that's king. Nobody thought anything about it. I mean, what's the chance they're going to both rule? I mean, how long do 7-year-olds rule as king? Well, 40 years. So, there's a real good chance this guy's going to get to be king. Except, there's several sons of Jehu, and which one of them is going to rule as king? Jehoahaz. Okay, he has a son named Joash. But Jehoahaz has several sons. What's the chance that Joash is going to be the king? Probably pretty low. Oh, wait. Hazael comes in and conquers everything and leaves just a small handful of an army. And Joash has left the guy to be king. Now they have a problem. They don't want both kings named the same. So they give Joash, the son of Jehoahaz, These names all sound alike in my English ears, English-speaking ears. Jehoahaz, his son Joash, it isn't appropriate for him to reign in Israel under the same name his rival down south has. So they add a syllable to his name and give him a ruling name, Jehoash. The thing is, the syllable they put in there is just shortened form of Yahweh. So that's kind of an interesting thing. He's making a nod to Yahweh is God because his father humbled himself before Yahweh and got his country back. So Jehoash becomes the ruling name for the king of Israel. Verse 10. In the 37th year of Joash, king of Judah, Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, became king in Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 16 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord and did not turn away from any of the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. He continued in them. So he's no different than his dad, or any of the other kings of Israel for that matter. And so, no better, no worse. He's just a typical king of Israel. Verse 12. As for the other events of the reign of Jehoash, all he did and his achievements, including his war against Amaziah, king of Judah, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Jehoash rested with his fathers, and Jeroboam succeeded him on the throne. Jehoash was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. So, his whole reign, all we really know about it is he changed his name to be king. He reigned for 16 years. He fought a war with Judah, and he died. And he named his son Jeroboam, the same guy that is the epithet for all the kings of Israel. That they continued to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. So he names his son Jeroboam. That tells you a whole lot about him right there. Why would you name your son after the guy that caused Israel so much problems? He obviously honored him. And that's all we know about him, really. He's a rather unremarkable king. And he died. Verse 14. Now Elisha was suffering from the illness from which he died. Jehoash, king of Israel, went down to see him and wept over him. My father, he cried, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. So Jehoash is on the throne. His father reigned 17 years. His grandfather reigned 28 years. So it's at least, 35 years that they've been reigning. Since the last time we heard from Elisha. Elisha is now in the process of dying. He's an old man because he had actually been a prophet for a number of years before Jehu became king. There was, I think, 4 kings from Ahab to Jehu, something like that. And so Elisha has been active prophet for a long time. Easily 50 years. And he was an adult when he started being Elijah's servant. And then Elijah got taken up and he's got the mantle. And so he is ancient. It's not surprising that he's got his illness that he's going to die from. And Jehoash comes down to see him and weep over him and commiserate with him. And basically is asking, what can you do for me? Verse 15. Elisha said, get a bow and some arrows, and he did so. Take the bow in your hand, he said to the king of Israel. When he had taken it, Elisha put his hand on the king's hands. Open the east window, he said, and he opened it. Shoot, Elisha said, and he shot. The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Aram, Elisha declared. You will completely destroy the Arameans at Aphek. So Elisha is aware of the very weak state of the country of Israel. And he knows that God means for Jehu's descendants to be on the throne for the fourth generation. This is the third, this is the second, rather, generation. So they got to last a while. And he prophesies victory, and that he will, with his very small army, destroy the army of Aram and at Aphek, and that happens, and so they maintain their political independence, and so they have great military victory, not because of their strategy, not because of their strength, not because that, but just because of God's grace and mercy. And Elisha tells that, and it happens. Verse 18, then he said, take the arrows, and the king took them. Elisha told him, strike the ground. He struck it 3 times and stopped. The man of God was angry with him and said, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, then you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it, but now you will defeat it only 3 times. So Elisha, told him to strike the ground, and, arrows are valuable, and you don't want to risk breaking them, blah, blah, blah. And he just kind of taps the ground 3 times, and he's done. He doesn't want to mess the arrows up, he doesn't. Now, he was king. He could command, 10,000 arrows to be made if he needed to be. So if he had just struck the ground, shattering arrows and sending them everywhere, if he'd struck it a bunch of times, that would have been good. But he just kind of taps him 3 times and he's done. And so Elisha tells him, you're going to win in battle 3 times because you tapped it 3 times. But Elisha was angry with him by not trusting God enough. This was a divination technique that was, in one sense, imported from outside the Israelite culture. It was from other countries, other races around. It was not common, though. Elisha was trying to make an object lesson. And he knew that I keep having problems with Jehoash. That name just tough for me. Jehoash, he knows he doesn't really have staying power. He won't keep on keeping on. And that's the thing about striking the ground 3 times. If he had struck it a bunch of times, 5 or 6 times, God would have given him victory those many times and the staying power to keep after it till he won the war, not just won some battles. He's going to win 3 battles, but not the war. But he's going to beat Aram back enough that they stay independent. And he's going to regain territory that is Israelite territory that's been lost to Aram. He's not going to be a great king, but he's not going to be a bad king either. God's going to use him to regain Israel's strength, but that's about it. Verse 20, Elisha died and was buried. Now Moabite raiders used to enter the country every spring. Once, while some Israelites were burying a man, suddenly they saw a band of raiders, so they threw the man's body into Elisha's tomb. When the body touched Elisha's bones, the man came to life and stood up on his feet. We get the end of the story of Elisha. And as a dead man that's decomposed to being just bones, he still has the spiritual power of resurrection. They were having a funeral. They had a dead man. They knew he was dead. They're going to the man's tomb, and they see raiders. Well, you don't continue with a funeral. You don't let them attack your funeral. You ditch the body and you leave town. It's time to leave Dodge, folks. And Elisha's tomb was there, convenient, and they throw the body in. It lands on Elisha's bones, and the man comes back to life and stands up. He has that much spiritual power that after he's been decomposed and he's just bones left, somebody gets raised from the dead. Elisha was a powerful prophet. Very little of his words get recorded. Only basically in conversations he had with other people. But he had a spiritual power to do miracles that was unmatched until God's own Son, Jesus of Nazareth, comes on the earth. He's recognized as being a powerful man of God. The greatest miracle worker of any of God's prophets. He directly did miracles under God's direction, and even his bones had miracle working ability. And he had a very, very long life. Verse 22. Hazael, king of Aram, oppressed Israel throughout the reign of Jehoahaz, but the Lord was gracious to them and compassion and showed concern for them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. To this day, he has been unwilling to destroy them or banish them from his presence. Hazael, king of Aram, died, and Ben-Hadad, his son, succeeded him as king. Then Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, recaptured from Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael, the towns he had taken in battle from his father Jehoahaz. 3 times Jehoash defeated him, and so he recovered the Israelite towns. So he captured the territory that Hazael took from Israel in those 3 battles, but he didn't win the war. But he restored the land. People could live in their cities again. His dad managed to get political independence, but not economic independence, not security. He managed to get the territory back, but didn't succeed in defeating Aram. Such political weakness comes from disobedience to God. If any of them had humbled themselves, gotten rid of the golden bulls, worshipped Yahweh and Yahweh only, which Elisha was trying to get them to do. Elijah had tried to get them to do it before, and had not been compromised with the way that things had turned out. If they hadn't allowed the Asherah pole to be rebuilt and people to worship at it. Yahweh might have really done a work there. But as it was, Yahweh was going to fulfill his word that Elisha had said that Jehu's descendants would sit on the throne of the fourth generation. This is only two of the generations, so we've got two more to come. He's not willing for Israel to be destroyed and wiped out and gone, so he still keeps it there. But very weakened, very small. Yeah, great land area, but not many people. Let's face it, the army was every able-bodied man in Israel. If you were able to hold a weapon, you were in the army. You only got 10,000 fighting men. In David's time, there was 6 million fighting men. In Solomon's time, the archaeological evidence, about 12 million fighting men. He's got 10,000 plus. Just a handful more. And he manages to do good things with it, but they don't have an effective fighting force. They don't have an effective army. They can't do anything but barely defend the land, and that's only because Yahweh chooses to let them win. And they won 3 times, and they didn't win the war. Just like Elisha had told him he would. Holy Father, you direct history, and you are trying to draw the Israelites back to yourself, that they would obey you, and they stubbornly refused to, and you continued to cause them defeat, and they should have known to humble themselves and pray and seek your face and turn from their wicked way and come back to obedience in you. And you sent 2 of the world's most powerful prophets, one of which was the most powerful prophet until your very own son came to the earth, who is, of course, going to be better than anybody else. And yet, even then, they still did not repent and turn and follow you. You are merciful and gracious in that you allowed them to continue to live in the land, even with that kind of provocation. Lord, you were fulfilling your promises. You were preparing the land for what you were going to do. The people should have known. The people should have followed you. You had given plenty of examples, time and time and time again, both positive and negative. Positive for when people obeyed you, and negative for when they disobeyed you. And yet they still did not come back to worship you wholeheartedly. Lord, have us to be humble before you, that we would do what you tell us to do, that we wouldn't invent our own ways of doing things, that we would study your word and apply it and do things your way. In your holy name, amen. I am your host, Frank Reich, Associate Pastor of Family and Ministry at Grace Fellowship Baptist Church, and this has been the Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, August 21st, 2024. This was recorded on Sunday, August 18th, 2024. And Oscar finished his sermon series on the 7 churches in Asia Minor, and did a masterful job. I enjoyed today's sermon. I hope to see you there Wednesday night. If I don't see you there, we'll see you here on YouTube. Have a blessed week.